All right, welcome back to Heads and Tails. I'm Henry. I'm one of the co-founders at Oppidan, and I'm really privileged and super delighted to have Louisa Mitchell with me today. Louisa has been a very modest mentor to me. Not modest as a mentor, but she is modest and has been a mentor. And a hero to Oppidan, really, since we met some years ago now. Louisa wrote for the FT, I believe I'm right in saying. She worked in finance, investment banking. She's lived in Hong Kong, New York City. She knows the world. And then in 2015, she ends up designing and implementing a pilot project in White City, which is the initiation of West London Zone. I believe it was an idea from the States. I hope you'll tell us more about that. Since then, she's led the organisation to become West London's heavy hitter for supporting young people with the social, emotional and academic progress that they need. This is called Sea Change, SEA, and this Sea Change has now benefited thousands of young people across West London. And maybe one day further afield, who knows? It's a fab organisation, and I'm really lucky to have you with me. So thanks, Louisa.
Thank you, Henry. I don't think of myself as a heavy hitter. I'm not a heavy hitter, and I'm day to day just trying to improve the communities that children grow up in. And I have been a huge supporter of Oppidan because you're doing exactly the same thing in different ways, in different contexts, but we're all trying to achieve the same thing. And I think what you and Walter have achieved is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. That's really kind. Heavy hitter, then we'll just say the organisation is a heavy hitter. I won't embarrass you anymore. We're obsessed with mentoring. You love mentoring. I'd love to hear your perspective on mentoring from your own life, from your own progression into running West London Zone.
Yeah, I as you know, and you've talked about our framework of supporting children to achieve better social, emotional and academic outcomes, our SEA framework for Sea Change. I am a big believer in looking at the whole child and supporting the whole child. I think we're very focused on the A part of that in the school system, academics, and actually we really need to be looking at children as a whole. I didn't have any great mentors in school when I was growing up, to be really honest. I've listened to some of the people you've interviewed in this podcast, and I'd love to have a story about some fantastic teacher at school who unearthed my potential. I didn't have that, but I would say that in my early career, I had two amazing mentors at Goldman Sachs, which is where I ended up in finance. And they instilled a lot of the key principles in me that I apply today in a very different context. And through West London Zone, I have had really been very privileged to have a number of fantastic people who have supported me in the organisation. There are actually too many to name, but I think key mentors to learn from, not just skills and experience, but to get confidence and to develop all of our social and emotional and academic equivalent, however old we are in our lives, outcomes are really key. At the moment, I'm fortunate enough to benefit from a fantastic pro bono executive coach called Francesca Tanz, who works with the Alexandra Partnership. And she has worked with me for 4 or 5 years and been completely instrumental for me. And I wish that everybody could have that kind of support.
Amazing. Can I ask, just because it won't be often we have someone from Goldman Sachs on this podcast, what's something that translated neatly from Goldman Sachs days into what you've been doing? Preparation. I love that. Okay.
And if you ask, Joe Prendeville has worked with me here. He's my Chief Development Officer for 8 years. And he would say to you that the thing he noticed most when he came into West London Zone 8 years ago was that nobody goes into a meeting unprepared. And that came from the kind of rigor applied at Goldman Sachs and those two people who used to say to me, it's all in the prep. I get quite nervous about presenting and public speaking. And as I said to you, I'm not a natural podcast interviewee. And they taught me it's all in the prep. If you're prepped, it's okay. That said, I'm not prepped for this because it's a podcast. It's not a presentation, but preparation.
Excellent. Back at school, did you love it? Maybe there's an anecdote from school that helps us understand what you're like as a person.
Again, I really wish I could say I've got some amazing experience at school that made me where I am today. I didn't love school. I I found school really hard work. I'm very tall, and I was the tallest girl in my secondary school at the age of 12. There was me and one other girl, and she was a very glamorous model. I was not. And at my first parents' meeting, I remember a teacher sort of looking at me directly and my mum and saying, you know, she's so tall and she looks so different to all her peers that we just don't really know how to handle her because she just seems so different. And that dogged me the whole way through my school life. And I was always very quiet, very introvert. I spent the whole time wearing shoes that were too small for me so my feet didn't look so big. And now I have really, really uncomfortable feet today. But maybe, you know, that is why I feel so passionately about trusted adults and mentors in schools today. And at West London Zone, you know, that is what we're doing. At Upper Dan, that is what you're doing in our different ways. And I see the power of our incredible West London Zone link workers in terms of getting to know children really well and helping to unlock their social, emotional, and academic potential. And maybe that influenced me, the experience I had that I found so difficult.
I'm sure it's not all been plain sailing the last few years. Maybe a toughest moment from that kind of career trajectory with West London Zone? Anything you're happy to share?
Yeah, I am. I actually, in the shelf on the opposite wall of my office here, I have in a frame, because I it's just stayed there for a long time now, but I have the minutes of the board meeting after our pilot project. There's a section from those minutes that reads, there's no money, the management team want to leave, and there's no actual evidence that this works. But there's momentum, and so we will proceed nonetheless. And so I'm afraid that was the case after the pilot project. We actually delivered some great outcomes in the pilot project, but you know, it was a short pilot project. There wasn't real evidence that it worked, and there wasn't any money, and we were all exhausted, and we're sort of slightly wondering how on earth to go on. Hence, the management team all want to leave. But there were two brilliant funders and partners who came to me after that board meeting, Impetus, the venture philanthropy organisation, and Bridges Outcomes Partnerships, the social investment arm of Bridges Fund Management. And they said, we're going to get behind this, and we're going to get behind you, and we're going to do this. And actually the two people there, Sebastian Ergas at Impetus and Andrew Lebbett at Bridges, they still are advisors today. And they have been mentors to me, and they've been fantastic. So that was a tough moment.
I mean, that's so inspiring for anyone really kind of pushing through the weeds or feels like dragging themselves through sludge in an organization as it gets going. I love that. There's momentum, we'll proceed nonetheless. I think you need that on like a neon sign on the wall or something.
Yeah, I'm actually a massive believer in momentum. You know, you have to take momentum when you can. And the board was right. And doesn't every startup almost go bust? I mean, I don't know, but we did.
And what about the best moment? I'm sure there are many more to come, but has there been a peak that's felt an obvious highlight?
Look, I'm really lucky. I'm really lucky. I love what I do. I feel really privileged. I see the social impact every day. I feel overwhelmed by the need sometimes, to be honest, particularly today. I think young people are growing up in some of the most challenging social and economic contexts we've ever had today. And we've done this through the Grenfell Tower fire, COVID. You know, it's been challenging. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm incredibly lucky. You know, every time I go to school, we have a community day. One of our increasingly popular half-term football tournaments, or I look out across my whole organization, you know, that was 0 people in 2015, or our partner event. You know, I just have fantastic experiences all the time. But actually, I will tell you that a few weeks ago, I was on Portobello Road with my family on Saturday morning, and two actually incredible young women now flattened me in the market. And they were young women now who had been on one of our first cohorts in 2016 in one of the secondary schools in White City. And they were fantastic. And one of them, I mean, I had to beg her head teacher not to exclude her. He said, we can't help anymore. And I begged him not to exclude her. And anyway, it's a long story, but she told me she's now studying English at university. She always wanted to be a sports teacher. She was teaching in an after-school sports club, and she had plans to go into sports marketing now. And it was just brilliant. And the other one, she really was predicted not to get any level 4s in her GCSEs, and she actually went on to get 7. And she went on to study in her A-level to get her A-levels, and she'd gone on to be a practitioner with the NHS, an administrator with the NHS, and she was now about to start doing an apprenticeship in public health. And she was in our first little film about West London Zone, and in that film she was asked, what have you got out of West London Zone? And she said, she looked straight into the camera and she said, I learned to speak up, to say how I feel and to say what I want. And on that Saturday morning at Portobello Road, she looked me straight in the eye and she said, I know what I want and I have a life plan now. And I was really reminded of what she said in that first film. And I can't tell you, Henry, moments like that are just, that is why we do what we do.
That's super, super inspiring. And I'm sure it must be difficult because the rest of the time you're probably stuck in the weeds a bit, and then all these case studies and stories and student names and probably fade into this one big picture. And how lovely to see someone out in the street, them see you, and that be a moment that's recognized. So totally appreciate that. That's magic.
Yeah, I do. I mean, listen, running organizations, you do deal with difficult stuff every day. And of course, but I make sure that I go into a school every week. I try to stay really close to the work and understand it. And I am inspired by the young people and by our incredible link workers and my team every week. So I actually feel it a lot. And it's really important to me to do that.
Great. Content. Are you a reader? Do you watch films? Do you like podcasts? You don't have to say yes. I don't spend a lot of time on podcasts other than this one. Perhaps there's some content you can share that's going to help open our eyes to something in the coming days.
I don't love podcasts. I don't love being interviewed, as you know, but I also don't actually listen to many podcasts. I do read quite a lot. And the reason I don't listen to many podcasts is actually I have an incredibly busy work life. I run a collective impact, multi partner stakeholder organization. I spend all day in meetings. I also have an incredibly busy home life, and I'm actually deeply introvert. There's maybe my experience at school tells you. So I really struggle to get downtime, processing time, and I actually struggle to quieten my brain enough to think and to process. And I find, so listening to podcasts when I'm walking or commuting or when I would do it, that's just, we're in an age of information overload. To me, that's a bit of information overload if I'm doing that. And I really need that time to come down and to process stuff. So I don't actually have much time to listen to podcasts, and I don't, but I do listen. I've actually listened to some of your episodes here, which I think are brilliant. And I listen, if I see someone good on Diary of a CEO or How to Fail by Elizabeth Day or something, I'll listen to it. But I'm not.
What are you reading? What's
I read a lot, but I read fiction. Again, I read every night before I go to sleep because I need to, as I said, my brain's a bit worry. I need to quieten my brain. At the moment, I actually read. I like spy novels. I always wanted to be a spy when I was younger, and I'm really not. But I'm currently reading my way through the Mick Herron Slow Horses series. I remember reading all the John le Carré when I was younger. But I also read just sort of contemporary English and American literature. I have a friend who's a very successful journalist who basically just sends me books all the time and I read them.
We've discovered something we have in common, because I find I desperately want to read non-fiction or to educate myself or to read about history, but all I really want to read on holiday is Eric Ambler. I want like pure, simple 60s spy stuff. And I kind of know what's coming, but I'm totally with you on that. I inherited that from my dad, and I'm with you. So
it's not very helpful in terms of useful content for other people. I'm sorry.
It's not. But I think it says something really important about quietening the brain and finding an escape from what you're doing. And if you're a teacher, if you're a educationist, if you're running an organization, the chances are you're sweating through your brain all the time. And I think finding a way to escape that is really important. So you've hit the nail on the head, I think, in lots of ways.
I've actually had to intentionally discipline myself to do that.
Yeah, I love that intentional discipline. I think really important. Um, Unpopular or controversial opinions. You're introverted, you don't like podcasts. I doubt we're going to get something super inflammatory from you, but anything you think you'd stand up behind as a potentially controversial opinion?
Yeah, I'm not really a very controversial person. I'm also just extremely boring, to be honest.
No, you're not.
I run a collaborative system of support. I'm a system stitcher. I can't really afford to be controversial. You know, we're maneuvering from within the education, health, social care system. You know, we can't really afford to be that controversial. And maybe ultimately that's a weakness and that will catch up with us. But, you know, when you're stitching systems, that's how you need to be. Listen, if I was gonna, I think possibly controversial is, you know, the focus rightly at the moment is on increasing level of resource. And I feel frustrated every day by the fact that we don't invest more in our children and young people who are facing a very well reported crisis in many different ways, which I've already, you know, talked about a little bit in terms of mental health and happiness and lots of things. And, you know, recently, Sir Kevin Collins did that interview with the Times Education Supplement, long interview about you know, his recent kind of time trying to get that funding through government. And I felt every word of what came across as pain, frustration, and actually, sadly, disappointment with self, I think, in that interview. And I thought, you know, what he feels in the corridors of powers, I think we feel every day in the corridors of schools, community centres, in the streets and in our homes. And I feel intensely frustrated by that. But also, maybe controversially, for me, I wish the conversation would also focus a bit on waste. And that, I know that not everyone agrees with that, but as well as not being enough investment, I think we need a deep look at how we spend the money. You know, that there is waste in the system that we see every day. We see cold referrals not taken up. We see missed appointments because they've been made through cold referrals. We see expensive crisis interventions coming too late. And I think if there was a real focus on how we're working, as well as what we're doing, we could maybe address some of the waste as well as the lack of resource. It's not hugely controversial, but I know that the focus is on new resource, and I think we need to look at how we're doing what we're doing as well.
I agree. I think it's a really simple get out strategy to just say we need more when maybe there are, you said it well. And I like that idea of system stitching. Oppen's super different from you guys in lots of ways, but funnily enough, like working with very different types of student across independent, international and UK state funded sectors, like three completely different monsters of each with their own issues. But I have to sort of look at it like all these kids are the same in some sense, or just otherwise you constantly find yourself on one side or other of an ideological argument, which is not helpful. So I think it's interesting that
I just think, you know, we have to stitch that resource has all gone, that's been cut and cut and cut. And the way the system works at the moment, you've got education, health and social care, and you cannot divide a child into three. You know, you can't do school, mental health specifically, but health and family. Like you need to stitch them all together, and that's a role in itself that needs resource, and that's where the whole trusted adult piece comes for us, mentors to a degree for you in a very different context. And if you're going to do that, you need to do it deep in each community, which is how we work. I know, you know, deep in each community that we work in, and that means you need to be strong leaders. But you can't really alienate people along the way. Like you're really trying to stitch. And people say to me, you know, how do you manage that in difficult situations? And it's, you just come back to the child every time. You come back to the child, you put the child at the center. You can pretty much agree every time because we are all trying to do our best for the children.
Lovely. We've got time for one more question, which is maybe a piece of advice. I'm sure you'd have many if we had more time, but a piece of advice for someone in the sector interested in education, maybe wants to work in charities and social impact, or maybe they're in schools. What might you share with them to help them along their path?
So I love the way you asked that question, because if you had said to me, what advice have you got for someone in the sector? I would have, and you'd stop there. I would have said to you, that's the problem, Henry. What is the sector? Actually, what is the sector? I've just said to you, like, education, health, social care. There is no such thing as a sector for me. It's children, right? Children. We need to look at children as a whole and how we support children. But you then, you saved yourself by talking about education, social enterprise, charity. And I think I would say, don't think about the sector. Think about how you want to build experience of working with children. And I would say that I've had very broad-ranging experience in the private, public, and social sectors. You mentioned that at the beginning, and that has held me in really, really good stead. I'm a big believer in sort of a range of experience, and I think life is long, and there is now flexibility to do lots of different things. And I just really encourage people to get a broad range of experience and to think about people as people, not sectors as sectors.
Beautifully put. You've been really kind. You've shared time. I said it would be painless. I hope it has been painless. I know there's huge excitement and growth and progress and change coming for your organization. And I know that the rest of us on the sideline will be in a privileged position to watch it. So thank you very much for sharing the time, and look forward to hearing more soon.
Thank you very much, Henry. We do have exciting times ahead. We're expanding outside of London now and going national. And it's really through relationships with fantastic people, of which you and Up and Down are one, who inspire us every day, that has enabled us to do that. So thanks for having me on here, and thanks for all the great conversations and advice over the years as well.